You have one bucket that holds 2 gallons, and another bucket that holds 5 gallons. How many buckets do you have?
2?
Idiocracy is a great example of an underrated cult classic, but in the traditional sense, what can even be classified as a cult classic? Now, most of the time, the word cult classic is used for movies that flopped at release or were critically panned, but later developed a cult-like fan base. Then how can something that's already been considered a cult classic be underrated in and of itself? That's why in this video, I'm going to be looking at Mike Judge's aforementioned 2006 film, Idiocracy. Now, if you're familiar with Mike Judge at all, you'll know that he's most famous for creating Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill. But in terms of live action projects, his most popular work was on the 1999 satirical comedy, Office Space. Now, if you compare Beavis and Butthead and Office Space together, it's clear that these two don't share a lot of similarities. But Idiocracy somehow manages to combine the satirical nature of Office Space with the absurdity of Beavis and Butthead. And Idiocracy's premise is just one of the most interesting a movie could have. It asks the question, what would happen if the human race just became dumber and dumber until one day it could no longer function? And Idiocracy just takes this premise and runs with it, making for some really hilarious moments. But before I get ahead of myself, let's quickly go over the plot of the movie. The movie starts off with our main character Joe Bowers, as he's been chosen for an experiment that is meant to hibernate super soldiers so they can be used when needed. But the only thing about Joe is that he isn't a super soldier, as he is quite frankly
average in every category. Remarkable, truly. The most average person in our entire armed forces.
The fact that Joe is so average makes him the perfect candidate for the experiment, which leads to him and Maya Rudolph's character Rita both being sent into hibernation for 1 year. But because of issues within the project, the US government actually forgets to let Joe and Rita out, leaving them hibernating for around 500 years. When Joe finally wakes up, he is shocked to find out that 500 years have passed, but before he can fully process it, he is quickly caught and sent to court for not having his tattoo. Now, in the world of Idiocracy, tattoos are given to each person as some sort of a futuristic ID. But that begs the question, if there's all this futuristic technology, why is everyone so stupid? Now, it's implied that there were doctors around to make all this technology before everyone became dumb, meaning this technology that we see could be centuries old. But all of this actually just brings us to our first real-world parallel. With new things like iPads and smartphones, we're finding that these revolutionary pieces of technology are actually harming us more than they're helping us. And this is more so the case now than 20 years ago when Idiocracy first released. Using this logic that we see in real life, all these advancements that are shown in Idiocracy are just leading to the downfall of humans, even if some of the technologies shown are more advanced than what we have right now. Now, going back to the movie, because of Joe's inability to understand how the human race worked at this point in time, when he tried to appeal to their sense of logic, he was quickly laughed off court and sent to jail, where he got his tattoo, did his IQ test, and was about to be put into holding, but within 5 minutes, he outsmarted his guard and escaped. Now, a fugitive desperate to get home and running out of options, Joe meets up with Frito, who was the guy he first met when he woke up, and asks him if there's a time machine. Once Frito says yes, they both embark on a journey to find it. Shortly after, Joe reunites with Rita and the group continues on in their quest to find a time machine. But since Joe is still a fugitive, a scanner scans his tattoo and alerts the police, who then quickly destroy Frito's car. Because the group no longer has a car, Frito takes Joe and Rita to one of the craziest things I've seen on screen.
Welcome to Costco. I love you.
It's this Costco that's as big as multiple city blocks, which is pretty cool to see on screen, but it's not just that. It's also interesting because Costco is a real corporation. It's not a fake company that's used solely to be in the movie, which Idiocracy already has with the former Brando. It's a real company, and not only that, Mike Judge also makes sure to include others like Starbucks, Fuddruckers, and even Carl's Jr. The satirization of real-world companies in Idiocracy makes the futuristic dystopian setting much more believable to audiences. But anyways, back to the plot. Frito tells Joe and Rita the reason why he took them into the Costco is because there's a shuttle that could possibly take them to the time machine. But before Joe can even board it, officers catch him yet again and take him to the White House? As it turns out, the IQ test Joe took in prison actually proved that he's the smartest man in the world, and because of that, the government really needed his help. Now, in the future, the government is shown to be a complete joke. I mean, this guy is sponsored by Carl's Jr., and this kid won his spot in the cabinet from a magazine contest. Now, Idiocracy was released in 2006, so could this be some sort of political jab? I don't know, I wasn't born yet, but regardless, the government is useless in this movie. We eventually cut to the president, who's played by Terry Crews, giving the people of America a speech about how now that they have the smartest man on the earth, all their problems will be solved. Now, Joe, obviously being an average man, doesn't know how to solve all these issues, but at this point, he really has no choice. Joe's first and most important order is to figure out the issue with the crops. But since Joe isn't a scientist, he has no idea what's wrong with them. So he starts talking to Frito and Rita and asks if there's any way they can just leave now for the time machine. But before he does, he notices that the crops aren't being watered with water, they're being watered with Brondo, an energy drink. Now, I already briefly went over Brondo, but in Idiocracy, Brondo is literally the corporation of all corporations. I mean, they're so big that they literally bought the FDA, which is probably why they were allowed to water all these crops with an energy drink. Regardless, this is an issue that Joe can actually solve, and all he has to do is convince the cabinet members to water the crops with water.
What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops.
Yes.
Water. Like out the toilet?
Now, it does take some convincing on Joe's part due to how brainwashed everyone is by Brondo, but eventually, the crops are getting watered correctly. At night, Joe talks to Rita about how he's in too deep and how he really needs these crops to be watered by the morning, but unfortunately, they aren't. On top of that, Joe's decision to switch from Brondo to water caused Brondo's stock price to drop by a lot, causing mass unemployment and riots outside of the White House. Because of all these issues, Joe is captured for the last time and sent to Monday Night Rehabilitation, which is basically a modern gladiator fight with monster trucks. At this point, things are looking pretty grim for Joe, with basically the entirety of the USA preying on his downfall, with him being in serious danger because he's in the monster truck gladiator fight. At home, Frito and Rita watch the rehabilitation live, but while this is happening, Rita opens the curtains and actually notices one of the plants is growing. Not only that, but when Frito and Rita were driving back to the rehabilitation center, they see that acres upon acres of land are growing crops, meaning that Joe was indeed innocent and should be taken out of rehabilitation. Because of this, Rita hatched a plan that would prove Joe's innocence to everyone, in which she gave Frito a camera and asked him to basically record the crops growing. She would then take that footage and put it onto the Jumbotron. All Joe had to do was hang on for a little while longer. But at this point, after Joe literally outmatched two monster trucks, it was just him, an average dude with no weapon, versus a maniac with a flamethrower. After some back and forth between Joe and Flamethrower Guy, with Frito getting distracted in the middle of his mission, Joe is literal seconds away from becoming toast until Frito finally comes through and shows everyone the truth. Because of Joe's now newly confirmed innocence, the president comes down and narrowly saves Joe just in the nick of time. Now, in the aftermath, Joe talks to Rita and she says that she isn't coming back in a time machine because she's more needed in the future. And this influences Joe, as when he's giving a speech, he realizes that he's worth more here and the people need him, whereas in the past he was working a useless desk job. Because of this, he decides to stay. But also, it doesn't really matter because shortly after, it was revealed that the time machine didn't even exist, it was just an amusement ride called the time machine. But all that doesn't really matter, as Joe ends up becoming president, marrying Rita, and having the smartest kids in the world with her, making the future of the future really bright. Today, watching Idiocracy, it is now seen as an underrated masterpiece, but 20 years ago in 2006, it really wasn't perceived that way, like most other cult classics. But interestingly enough, while cult classics usually get theatrical releases before they become cult classics, Idiocracy was never really given a chance, as 20th Century Fox only gave it a limited release of around 130 theaters, leaving it to only gross an abysmal $500,000 off of a $2.5 million budget. Now, that really begs the question, why would Fox try to sabotage one of their own movies, even after it was made by a well-known director and had well-known actors attached to the project? Well, there are multiple reasons to why Idiocracy didn't get a full release in theaters, with one of them being that it got negative responses in test screenings, but also the biggest one being its over-satirization of real-world companies. So it turns out one of its biggest strengths actually turned out to be its weakness when it came time to release, because of how much it made fun of things like Carl's Jr., Starbucks, and Costco and whatnot. Sponsors started panicking and Fox pulled it from theaters. Now, as someone who takes it personally when his favorite movies don't get good box office numbers, I feel like this is the only way Idiocracy could have been released. I mean, think about it, it's a movie so ahead of its time that it wasn't even put in theaters. But Fox did end up giving it a proper DVD release, meaning that people did end up seeing it, and 20 years later, it is a lot more relevant than it is now. With people in 2026 who watch Idiocracy calling it more of a documentary rather than a sci-fi comedy, I think that Idiocracy, even though it isn't as popular as its older brother Office Space, should still be given a watch by anyone. And even if you don't care about its satire or its commentary on the landscape of the world, Idiocracy is just a fun watch, making it an underrated gem. Alright, hey guys, that's it. Thank you for making it to the end. This is my first video on the channel, and I did put quite a few hours of time into it, so it just thanks, and subscribe for more content in the future.